This happened in 2011. Back then I was very engaged in political activism, and I ended up organizing an Occupy movement in the city I was living in, along with some other fellows. We camped in a downtown square for about 4 months, and throughout this period a lot of people came in and out. By the second month I had to travel to another city where my parents were living for a week. When I came back to the occupation, there was a guy living there that had arrived exactly when I had left. He had somehow already had some respect from other people in a very short period of time. He was tall, blonde, long hair, a bit hippie, had a profound voice that implied self-confidence. He had by some means a strange aura. But okay, no big deal, seemed like a cool guy after a while. Over time he became my friend, and we ended up having long conversations about pretty much everything that interested me and vice versa, like occultism, magic, UFOs, etc., until he brought up the vampirism subject, which I was not familiar with at the time. He explained to me some stuff like that vampires were basically normal people that could manage their own life force, and apparently they have been misinterpreted since always. He told me that there were some secret vampire groups, small ones, that preserved the rituals. There was no blood-sucking thing going on, as he said that blood was an analogy to life force. They were not actually sucking it from people, but they could indeed take somebody's life force. But more important, he said, was to know how to use your own. The conversation finished there. The whole thing seemed fascinating to me, and after a while, we went to sleep. Some days later, here's what happened. My house was quite close to the occupation, and once in a while some of my friends would often ask me to use the bathroom or to have a shower, and then this guy asked me the same. I said yes, no problem at all. Everything went fine, the guy had his shower, and we were walking back to the occupation, and he brought up the subject about vampirism again. This time he was wearing an anonymous plastic mask, which completely covered his face. He starts to explain to me how one can control their own life force inside dreams, and how would that affect the actual material body. Meanwhile, as he's explaining that, I see his jaw making a strange movement, as if there was something stuck between his teeth, and he was trying to clean it. When he finishes the explanation, he calls me by my name and raises the mask slightly so I can take a look at his mouth. And then I saw this huge canine tooth. He pulled the mask back down quickly. I didn't know how to react, so I just remained calm and I asked him what was that for if they didn't actually suck blood from other people. He told me that it worked out as a sort of antenna to capture different vibrations, and he managed to construct it by molding his life force into that shape inside his dreams. He asked me if I would be interested in doing the same. I told him that it sounded interesting, and he just left me to think about it. We arrived at the occupation as if nothing had happened. I didn't see any strange movements by his hands trying to insert a fake tooth into his mouth, or trying to remove it after. The sensation I got was that he pulled the tooth out by a jaw movement. The whole thing was just very strange to digest. I had no idea what to do, so I called my friend and he just said that the whole story sounded too crazy to be believable. We still lived together in the occupation for a while, but I never brought up the subject again. The guide totally noticed my attempt to avoid it, so he didn't push me on it either. There was another strange fact after a while. Once he was shirtless, and crouched organizing some stuff inside of his tent, and the muscles on his back formed into the shape of a winged dragon. The occupation eventually finished, and that guy ended up dating a girl that he met there, and they both had a kid together. He seemed pretty normal, despite those 2 occasions. I've gathered a few paranormal encrypted stories after moving to North Carolina. The silver UFO, the shadow person, the six lights, etc. But this one stuck out to me the most. I've never even heard of this thing or even knew that this thing existed, and I was a kid when I saw it. It could be my mind exaggerating, but another person with me saw it, and it freaked us both out. We were driving along the back roads of North Carolina and learning the shortcuts and ways to get around as we had just moved here. It was the evening, and it was around false summertime, the time where it's hot randomly in the spring, so the windows were rolled down. We were just having fun cruising and sightseeing. The other person with me was driving and was chit-chatting to me about the smells and plants that I should stay away from. We were passing a cow farm, so we rolled up our windows, and the curve past the farm was coming up, so we rolled them back down. Now after you hit this curve, there's a hill and it flattens out into a straight but crummy road. In the middle of the road, something blackish was walking. It was shaggy, and was just walking all calm as if it was sightseeing too. I remember my friend asking, "What's this dog doing?" It looked as big as a black bear or a derpy Saint Bernard, and it walked with a normal stride. We slowly crept up on it, hoping that it would hear the car and move out of the way, but it didn't. So my friend gave the horn a little tap, and this thing finally turned around. Its eyes were reflected from the headlights. It hunched down and hissed. When it turned, its tail lifted, and it was long and black. It then darted off into the woods. My friend was puzzled. I just sat there in disbelief at what I had just witnessed. It was an odd and quiet ride back home. Fast forward to more than a decade later, me and a few friends were looking at local urban legends because one of them swore up and down that they saw the ghost that everyone was talking about and wanted to know more about it. I'm zoning out because I'm an introvert, and went looking around in the website that we found. I see this title called The Vampire Beast of North Carolina, and was like, what the hell? North Carolina's got a hillbilly vampire? I click on it and read. Some beast was terrorizing locals and their farm animals, leaving puncture wounds, no blood, and leaving the body there. Multiple bodies of dead animals in one night, all dead the same way. I scoffed and say El Chupacabra, like Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, and kept scrolling. I read some more and saw, here's what witnesses recount seeing, and when I scrolled down to see a hand-drawn picture of it, I nearly shat bricks. The photo the eyewitnesses had drawn of what they saw looked exactly like what I had seen over a decade ago. The shape, the tail, the color. I went pale and exited out of the page and just sat there, thinking on my life's existence up to this point, wondering if I had some sort of brain damage, because I was like, there's no way that this can be real, what I saw. But what really hit the nail on the coffin was that this thing was attacking people's farm animals, and I had seen this thing by a cow farm. I haven't seen this beast again. I really don't want to because I think it's a bad omen since I have a superstitious family, which is why I think paranormal and odd occurrences happen to us. Whenever we do have odd experiences, we don't speak about it to each other. I'll let you decide whether or not she was really a vampire. Either way, I promise that this is a true story. It happened around December 2017. I had just finished high school, and one of my friends was hosting a house party. It was out in the country, large property, lovely view. It was a great place to celebrate the end of exams. I recognized a lot of people there and knew them quite well. However, there were two guests I didn't recognize, a boy and a girl. He was a stoic character with a solid build. Not quite muscle, not quite fat. Not quite someone that you would want to annoy. She was a thin figure with long amber hair and fair skin. He would scan the crowds while she shyly cradled a bottle. No one else was paying any attention to them, and I could tell they felt uncomfortable. They seemed nice enough, so I grabbed a friend and walked over to them, hoping that I could put them at ease. My friend left pretty quickly, but the girl seemed relieved that I was paying attention to them. She told me her name was Verity. Bit of an unusual name, but I thought it was pretty. Her boyfriend seemed a bit more comfortable too, but he didn't say much. I don't recall his name. Verity and I chatted for a while, but I was quickly running out of small talk. I asked her about the alcohol she was drinking and what kind she prefers, that sort of thing. She replied casually, it's okay, but my favorite substance is blood. I think that's a good cue to run away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I asked her why she enjoyed the taste of blood. I've cut my lip before, and I remember the taste being quite sour. She told me that the flavor is dependent on a person's health. The healthier they are, the sweeter their blood. It suddenly made sense as to why her boyfriend was built like an athlete. She taught me a few weird things about hematology, and was very knowledgeable about medieval execution methods. She explained them with a strange fondness. It was almost nostalgia. I only knew the Viking blood eagle, but that was enough to get her excited. We ended up talking all night. I listened to her gore-filled lectures, and they both listened to me as well. Even though my interests in stories were much less interesting in comparison, they didn't seem to mind. They smiled and encouraged me. In between subjects, Verity would draw some blood from her boyfriend, either with her nails or her fangs. He seemed okay with it. I talked to her boyfriend for a short while, too. We got along just fine, but we had very little in common, so it was a bit tricky to hold a conversation. He was into sports and cars, so he was probably human. After a while, I tried to encourage them to meet my friends. Verity, however, didn't like that. She was very possessive and insisted that I stay with them all night. I wasn't in the mood to argue with a bloodthirsty historian, and she was being very friendly with me, so I agreed. She didn't bite me once, and I'm grateful her boyfriend was there to feed her. Maybe she was a vampire, or maybe she just had some really weird habits. Either way, I hope you enjoyed my story. A few nights ago, I awoke to being restrained by what I can only describe as a vampire. I'm familiar with the paranormal, but this was a particularly impressive experience. I was pinned to my bed, trapped underneath the body of a young woman. It was as if she was trying to bite me, but at the same time doing everything in her power to stop herself. Or she was doing her best to bite me, but something was preventing her from being able to. She was struggling and jerking, breathing rapidly and kind of growling and snorting. The way she was moving, it was almost as if she was on fast forward. Her teeth were grazing my neck with her mouth wide open. I could feel them against my skin, but was sure that they never penetrated. I was unable to break free and struggled in fear, but realized that I couldn't get away, so just gave in and embraced her. When I embraced her, I found that I actually felt an overwhelming love, despite the disturbing nature of the experience. I had a very clear image of what she looked like. She had long, wavy hair, and somehow resembled myself. I could also feel her intention. Even though she was doing something violent, it was clear to me that she was good at heart. Eventually, because I was alternatively struggling against her, I did break free, and she disappeared. I had a similar experience to this around a year ago where I awoke to a dark, humanoid shadow being standing beside me, manipulating my energy. That being, however, I felt was inherently evil. This vampiric entity, on the other hand, didn't give off a sinister vibe. It just seemed to me that she was trapped in some kind of karma, unable to control herself. I know about the sleep paralysis demon phenomenon, and that there is supposed to be logical explanation for these occurrences. Honestly, I completely disbelieved in anything supernatural for most of my life. After everything I've experienced, though, it's impossible to deny that these kinds of things are real. This is a story that my grandma told me, so it may not be 100% accurate, but I'll try and tell it the best that I can. More than 70 years ago, sorry for not knowing the exact timeline, my great-grandfather died of a heart attack. He was, of course, buried like any other person. Here we have a tradition that every 5 years we lift the remains of the deceased, and the family can decide if they should put the body somewhere else or leave it there. This is mostly due to the empty spaces in the graveyard if the deceased doesn't have any family. So they raised my great-grandfather's remains, but the weird thing was that he had not decomposed. He looked exactly as if he had just been buried. After 5 more years had passed, they went to lift his remains again, but this time, the coffin was empty. This is not how the story ends. 10 years after all this happened, my aunt, that was 8 at the time, was home alone one day, and she heard a strange noise in the house, so she went to investigate. In the kitchen there was a strange man who looked at her and said, "Don't be scared. I just came to see my first granddaughter." And then he disappeared. Later that day she told her parents, and after describing the man, they went to get an old photo album, and she identified my great-granddad. When my grandmother tells this story, she tends to omit the last part that my aunt told me. According to my grandmother, the priest probably sold my great-grandfather's corpse because it wasn't decomposing, and she says that my aunt is lying about having seen him. At first, I thought she was on drugs, but then she did something that made me wonder if she was telling the truth. I was 16. A friend and I were walking through a local park at night when we saw this Asian woman wearing what looked like a traditional Chinese dress. She was dancing alone in the grass, and she then started running toward us, scared the crap out of me, and began telling us how handsome that we were. This woman appeared to be in her mid to late 20s, and honestly she was stunningly beautiful. She kept telling us that she was a vampire, and that she was centuries old. I was thinking, okay, she's obviously on something or she's crazy. But then she gazes into my eyes and says, "Do you want to feel my energy?" I said sure, and she then placed her hand a few inches from my face. The amount of energy or whatever it was that came from her hand caused my entire skull to vibrate and made me extremely dizzy. I have no idea what that could have been. I have never seen her again to this day, but I often think about it. I'm 23 now. I tried researching Asian myths and legends, trying to discover some kind of spirit or demon common to a specific culture that resembles her. Could anyone tell me what this apparition was, or if she was just a crazy woman with psychic abilities?